Hello, friends, and welcome back to r/ProRevenge. Our first story is about a power-hungry HOA president, and it's, of course, your favorite Karen. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. You can't park there. I won't be safe. HOA president Karen. So, a little backstory about my neighborhood. It's basically a long street with a cul-de-sac at the end. Karen lives in one of the 4 houses that encircle the cul-de-sac. So a few years ago, Karen proposed at our monthly HOA meeting that our street is too narrow for emergency vehicles like fire trucks or ambulances to fit through, and she's worried that they won't be able to reach the cul-de-sac houses in an emergency, which is bullcrap. It's not a through road, so only residents of this small street ever need to use it. Sure, it can be a little tight at times, but 2-lane traffic moves comfortably, and it rarely ever needs to because it's a quiet neighborhood street with not much traffic. Fire trucks can and have been accessing the cul-de-sac since the beginning of time. But Karen was on a power trip, and she wanted to have one side of the street curb painted yellow to restrict the parallel parking on the street. This move was heavily opposed because it would significantly limit street parking in our neighborhood. Plenty of people raised concerns that there wouldn't be enough parking, and this would affect the value of their homes. And since the street parking was first come, first served, it'd create undue competition between neighbors in securing a parking spot on our street. But Karen pushed back, saying that safety was more important than being able to find a parking spot. She said there's always plenty of room to park on the cul-de-sac if need be. It shouldn't be an issue. And after much deliberation, we put it to a vote, and the motion did not pass. The highly unpopular curb painting would not be happening. Or so we thought. Karen went to the fire department a few days later and voiced her concerns. She told them the neighborhood residents had her support in painting the curb, and on a Monday afternoon, while everyone was at work, they painted the curb yellow. We all came home that evening to find that our available parking options had been cut in half. People were livid. One neighbor in particular was having none of it. You see, he owned a small boat which he typically kept parked on the street, but now that parking was significantly reduced, he decided he'd have to find a better place for his boat. He waited for Karen to leave for work the next day and parked it right in front of her house on the cul-de-sac, per her suggestion. The look on her face when she came home to find her usual parking space taken over by a boat was almost worth the whole ordeal. And since he rarely ever took his boat out, it stayed parked in front of her house pretty much year-round. At the next HOA election, she was voted out. The next president got the curb painted back to normal, but Boat Guy still parks his boat in front of Karen's house. All is good in the world. And our last story. Sketchy tenant skipped town owing several months' rent. We tracked him down and ruined his career. I've lived in the Los Feliz area for 10 years now. I came to LA from Oregon to attend college. I never did finish college, but I did meet my husband here. I'm 34 now. My husband, Jim, 41, and I run a small craft store. We mostly depend on Jim's architect job. Since we could use more income, we decided to take on a tenant in our house. We bought a 2-bedroom bungalow where one of the bedrooms actually has its own private entrance. My husband made alterations to make it its own small apartment since it already had a private bathroom. It didn't initially have a shower, but my husband built one for it. There was no proper kitchen, but my husband fashioned a little nook where he installed a mini fridge, hot plate, and microwave. Over the past 4 years, we've had a couple of really nice tenants, usually college students who stayed for their year-long lease, then moved on. Everyone paid their rent on time and didn't ruin the room. Kevin was a different matter. Kevin was a 30-year-old bartender who worked at a local club. He seemed clean-cut and like he wouldn't cause any trouble, and since he was older than the college students we had before, we assumed he'd be even more responsible. We couldn't have been more wrong. After about 4 months that passed without incident, suddenly Kevin began to be a terrible tenant. He'd play loud music really late at night and make our neighbors call the police. We live in a quiet neighborhood. He'd bring home women, which is his right because it's his home and he's paying, but they'd talk super loudly late into the night and drink out on the porch, and once again caused neighbors to call the police because they just wouldn't shut up. I talked to Kevin about it, and he laughed in my face. He kind of had a different attitude towards my husband when my husband confronted him about it, because Jim would break the guy's jaw, But even though Kevin apologized, a few days later he'd go right back to doing it. He also got into the habit of smoking pot on the porch and would smoke so much of it that the neighbors would once again complain. He would pay his rent, but instead of paying it on the first of the month, as one might expect, he was often late by several days, or would ask favors from us that would take half of the rent on the 1st, the other half on the 15th, to coincide with his paydays. He would often pretend to have paid and claim that he'd left the check under our door when that was clearly a lie. We accommodated him and tried to be patient. He was only on a 6-month lease, so after those 6 months, my husband told him he had to leave. Kevin complained that we were being racist against him. Kind of weird, seeing as how we're all white in this story, but Kevin fancies himself to be black for whatever reason. On some days, he'd try to talk like he was Shaft, and on other days, with some failed Tupac impression. Anyway, so he said he'd move out, and that we had to give him time. That's fair enough. We gave him all the legal papers, and he said he'd vacate within a certain number of days. At the end of that time, he still wasn't gone, but he didn't look like he had plans to leave. He would rant about squatters' rights and all that. This whole time, he would continue to play loud music, smoke different stuff outside, bring home his women, and talk loudly late into the night and make a nuisance of himself. Finally, after 6 months had passed, and he'd been staying half a year without paying us rent, he moved out. My husband and I learned our lesson. He knocked down the wall he built, and now we live in a 2-bedroom small house again to ourselves. But Kevin didn't leave in good order. He snuck out because he knew he owed us several months' rent. He left no forwarding address. He stopped answering texts. What he did leave was a huge mess. He also stole a nice Keurig coffee machine that we put in his apartment for his use, and he also stole the mini fridge and microwave. It looked like he picked up most of his personal stuff, but his clumsy, sloppy self didn't check behind all of his little nooks and crannies, and we saw he'd abandoned lots of his stuff. We boxed up all these little items in a single box and labeled it with his name in case he ever wanted to claim them. My husband also went to the local courthouse to see about filing small claims on Kevin, but we didn't even know where he lived now. My husband isn't the type who snitches, bless his heart. He was of the opinion, oh, this is a learning experience. Let's do it differently from now on. But I'm not that way, and I don't want us to get ripped off without a bit of revenge. Kevin never really told us which bar he works at because he's a lying little weasel, but in his loud conversations late at night, while he's off talking like he's Charles friggin' Barkley, I overheard him name the bar he worked at. So one day, about 5 days after Kevin left, I drove over there and asked about him to the people who worked there. I don't let on that I'm one of his former landlords. The new bartender girl assumes I'm some sort of jilted lover, and I roll with it. She empathizes with me, and in talking about what a jerk Kevin is, she lets me know that the whole time he's been in the LA area, he's been going to school to become a licensed vocational nurse. I tell her that he blocked me on social media. No problem, she tells me. She whips out her phone and shows me his profile, which is set to private, but she's friends with him on social media. I see that he moved to Nevada and is now practicing as a LVN at a clinic. I thank the girl and go home. Now that I know where he works, I call the clinic and casually confirm that Kevin indeed works there. I find out the name of his supervisor and once again call the clinic pretending to be a customer. I casually confirm that this man is Kevin's boss. I then take the box of Kevin's stuff with all of his prohibited substances to the local police station with the explanation that Kevin used to be a tenant of mine and my husband's, but that he abandoned his quarters and also this box of personal effects. I look like a friggin' kindergarten teacher, and to the cop it's obvious I have no idea what any of this crap is. I tell the police I have no idea of Kevin's forwarding address, just his address of employment, and oh, I even have the number of his boss. I don't know how these things work, officer. Could you handle it? Of course, miss. That's our job. So a month later, my husband and I are still out of Keurig and 6 months of unpaid rent from Kevin, but calling the clinic again, pretending to be a relative asking, may I speak to Kevin, I find out, oh, Kevin doesn't work here anymore. Didn't he tell you? He got fired. Sheesh. The secretary kind of overshares, but it works out in my favor here. My husband, who knows what I did by this time and is fully on board, comes with me to the station and we sign an affidavit regarding what we know about all this crap in the box. They had contacted Kevin, and under pressure from the police and ours and in his new state, he finally admitted that the items were his. Scumbag. So now the misdemeanors are on his permanent record, rendering him unemployable in his field. We also found out his address, and he was served with papers for small claims court for several months worth of rent, theft, and damages. He was a no-show. Automatic victory for us. We're not holding our breath for this loser to actually pay us any money, but still, it felt good to win. My husband and I went to the bar where Kevin used to work, and since she recognized me, the new bartender girl gave me a big hug. I admitted that I wasn't a girlfriend of Kevin's, but that he was a tenant who screwed over my husband and I. The girl thought that what I did was great to get him busted. Speaking of busted, he was charged with possession in his new apartment and is in jail. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.